So I'm Joseph Kopser. Welcome to another episode of Catalyst Talks. What we're trying to do is to understand how technology and smart cities and disruption, automation, how all that has an impact on our daily lives. Today's topic is a lot of fun with Eric Greenwald and Brandon Thomas, looking at what it means right now for mobility, transportation, commuters, and the whole public transit industry with respect to cybersecurity, because we think of cybersecurity and protecting ourselves and our data in so many other ways. Today, we're going to talk about their report and findings as research associates with the Mineta Transportation Institute and what they found. So Brandon, Eric, thank you for being here. How are you guys both doing today?
Doing great.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Good. Well, while we're building up an audience on LinkedIn for those smart cities or transportation wonks, or even folks like Susan Shaheen, who is, a role model for so many people in this industry, while we wait for them to build up, why don't we go ahead and just kind of tell the audience how you got to now in terms of your background. Then we'll go into your cybersecurity report. And by the way, for the viewers that are watching this live on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, you can go in the comment section below, ask your questions, and hopefully Nora, our producer, will be able to see those and then put them on the screen as well. So we'll just start with you, Brandon. Go ahead and tell me how you got to now.
Sure. My background, mostly in software development. Done a lot of data-driven product development over the years. I've found myself in a lot of disruptive industries or disrupted industries early in their disruption, seeing a lot of pattern with how those disruptions have manifested starting in politics and government, working into retail, actually was in media for a bit, working for the Washington Post company. So I've seen disruption happen in that early stages, and most recently have been getting deep into the transit space, seeing a lot of the same patterns that I've seen in those other industries, but then also a lot of big opportunities. So it's been a really interesting space to get smart on, and a lot of interesting and exciting things happening right now.
Well, what I think is fascinating about what you're saying is the fact that, you came from disruption in different sectors like the Washington Post. If anybody's been disrupted, it's certainly the news industry. So hopefully those that are in transportation will continue to listen to it, which is why it's worth giving a shout out to Gabe Klein, who is a transportation, mobility, and innovation expert. And much of what I learned came from following Gabe's work. But Eric, let's tell your backstory of how you got to now.
So I am a lawyer, and my focus at the beginning of my career was on foreign policy and national security. I worked as a lawyer for the CIA and also the FBI. And it was when I was with the FBI in the late 90s, I guess it was, that I first started getting focused on cybersecurity. So I kind of took that national security foreign policy focus and channeled it into cybersecurity. I shifted around a bit in the middle of my career, did a bunch of different stuff working at law firms. I also did some time with the media, worked at 60 Minutes and also at NPR. But then went back, I came back into government, worked on the House Intelligence Committee where I was the chief counsel. And that's where I really began to focus in on cybersecurity. After spending about 5 years on the Hill, I then went into the executive branch. I was working at U.S. Cyber Command as Deputy Director for Operations, and then at FBI's National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force, and then at the White House and the National Security Council as the Senior Director for Cybersecurity. I then left government. I worked in the private sector as general counsel for a cybersecurity company, and now have my own law practice. But throughout the last, I guess it's 20 years now, I have been focused on cybersecurity issues, which has kept me well steeped in the world of technology generally.
I hear more acronyms every time I hear your background, Eric. That's really funny. There's a lot of word soup there.
Well, and for people that are listening, I hope that they tag folks in the comment section that should be listening to this, and it's important. So now we're going to get into the report itself. We're going to do two things. One, I'm going to put you two up, and Nora's going to help present some of the findings from the websites that people are going to be looking at. And at the same time, I'm also going to work on increasing my speed and latency, because I can already tell that my sound and my video are not as innovative as they need to be. So let's dig right into it. What is your overall finding? What do we need to be doing differently? And how should people be thinking about cybersecurity with relation to mobility and transportation?
Sure, I'll jump in here. The bottom line, what we discovered is that the the public transit space is ill-prepared. They don't have the right policies and procedures in place yet. They're not making the right investments. They, in fact, actually don't even have a really good picture of what cyber, unsavory activity is happening among their networks and within their systems. One key data point that really startled me, again, coming kind of fresh into this space, was that 22% of agencies that we surveyed have not claimed to never have had a cyber attack. And the reason that's startling is if you go to global organizations, according to some data from Dell Technologies, 82% of global organizations say they've had a cyber attack. And so that discrepancy is pretty scary, basically suggesting that agencies are actually having events, but sadly don't know. And therefore, the events continue. And so for me, that was a big learning.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that very few industries are well prepared with respect to cybersecurity. And it's common that they don't really understand what it is that they need to do. And even more common that they just don't have the resources available to dedicate to playing the cybersecurity game well. I don't think it's a shock to many people that the transit industry is no exception in that regard, but it's definitely troubling given what we rely upon the transit industry for, that there are so many challenges with respect to cybersecurity.
Yeah, and you add to that the trends happening in the space, specifically connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of technology, emerging technology coming into the space that historically has been, public transit. I don't think anyone would put public transit as the vanguard of employing technology and sort of the front of that digital transformation. It's kind of just now happening. But as those technologies get deployed, I think the cyber threat is not only there, but it's growing along with those trends. And so now is a good time to really kind of dig in.
So let's capture the audience's attention. Highlight for me 2 or 3 of the agencies or industry leaders or individuals, first of all, who do get this. Let's give shout outs to who's doing this right. And then after we do some of the praise, let's also be very real about what the worst case scenarios might be so we can capture the audience's attention.
Yeah, so one of the findings was a lot of the folks were really happy with the amount of information out there. 80% or so said they were getting everything they need from the industry and elsewhere. So you've got organizations like APTA publishing a lot of information. They just did a course for executives last fall, a lot of resources there. And then you can even get into the federal government. Eric, I don't know if you want to jump in here with regard to the fact that transit in general is considered a critical infrastructure under the DHS, under the Department of Homeland Security, and that opens up a whole cornucopia of fun that agencies can access.
Yeah, so Department of Homeland Security, which, as most people know, was created in the wake of 9/11, has a role to play in protecting all forms of critical infrastructure, of which transportation is one. The TSA, Transportation Security Administration, I believe that's what the acronym stands for, agency. They were also created shortly after 9/11, mostly focused on physical safety. DHS also has a separate organization, CISSP, that is responsible for cybersecurity. That is a much more recent vintage. I think only 2018 was when it began. And so you're seeing them with a newer focus on cybersecurity for the transit agency. And so CISSP and TSA are teamed up, working to try to provide guidance and assistance to the transportation sector. But it's an area where there remain a lot of challenges. And frankly, even though most of these agencies, private transit agencies, understand that the information is out there, too few of them are actually folding it into their practices. And that's either because they don't have the resources, don't have the wherewithal, and I think importantly, don't have the accountability. Nobody is holding them responsible for failing to take the measures that I think almost anybody would recognize are the appropriate ones with respect to cybersecurity.
Yeah, let me jump in here with one thing about the one thing that I had to do for myself getting into this as well is kind of the definition of what cybersecurity preparedness actually is. I think a lot of us fall directly into the technology, you know, the firewalls and the stuff we do to protect our systems. The reality, though, is cybersecurity, especially for an organization the size of a public agency, it's a much bigger thing. If you look at the NIST framework, which is kind of the backbone of most cybersecurity theory and knowledge right now, it's much more about not just the technology, but the people and processes that go around the technology. And I think for me, that was a big learning of realizing it's not just a technology problem, it's a people, process, and technology problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll just highlight that the NIST framework is, as Brandon says, sort of the backbone of the framework for thought and practice about cybersecurity. But it's not a how-to manual for securing your systems. It is really a framework for managing risk. And managing risk involves not just the technology, not just the software, but how your people work together to try to address the various forms of risk that your particular entity faces.
Okay, so let's say you're part of APTA, you're part of one of these agencies that either have oversight or execution. What do they do with this report? Well, we'll put on the link on how to find the report, but really, what are the next steps? What do they need to do with it?
That's a great question.
Okay, so let me back up. That's too vague of a question. Let's talk about how you found the answers. How did you come to the results? Because knowing how we got to now is just as important if we want to go forward to fix them. So talk a little bit about the methodology of the report.
Sure. So we conducted, I forget the number, like 40 or 50 different interviews of various heads of public agencies, technology folks, spoke to folks inside the government, legislative, on the Hill, within the administration, to really get a sense of where things were on that front. And then we produced a survey. We we ended up getting results from about 30 some odd % of the APTA members to understand more the data, the quantitative data around how prepared they are. And that's where a lot of these statistics that we quote come from.
Yeah. And then, Nora, if it's possible to bring up some of the work in terms of the websites, what they'd be doing, that might be good for our viewers to be able to visualize. But with that being said, Eric, I'll lean on you because your experience in government. Based on how we got to now, what are some of the steps of implementation or changes that you think need to be made?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And what I will say is that I think it's easy to jump to the conclusion, even without data, that cybersecurity preparedness is not what it should be. It's a lot harder to come up with what should be done about this. And the four of us working on this study really spent a lot of time talking about what are the recommendations that we should put forward. And it wasn't an easy or thoroughly straightforward question to answer. And I will say some of this is leaning on government, saying, "Hey, government, you need to do more work in developing standards that are specific to the transit industry." But are
you talking about standards at the federal, state, local, at what level?
This is standards for private transit agencies, which was the focus of our study, and they can come from the federal or state level or local level. But the reality is, state and local agencies aren't really well positioned to develop those standards. It's really the Department of Homeland Security working together with the Department of Transportation that is well positioned. But the reality is, there's a fair amount of information that the federal government has put out there. There's a lot of information that private transit organizations have put out there to assist transit agencies in trying to design and improve their own cybersecurity. The problem is that not very many of them, certainly too few of them, are implementing it. And this is where I come back to the question of accountability. And if you ask me what's the most important recommendation that we make,
Eric, what's the most important recommendation we're making?
If you were to ask me that, I would say that it's requiring the heads of the various private transit agencies to attest to their compliance, either with existing standards, or that if there's certain benchmarks that are informal out there, like maintaining log data for a year, having a cybersecurity incident plan, simple things like that, even just attesting that their organization is doing those things. I think that will change cultures and attitudes within those organizations, because the CEO will say, hey, I am out there publicly saying that we're doing these things. We need to actually do them.
And isn't the civilian private industry, and we'll get to the military perhaps in a second, aren't they already having to do that in banking and other areas? Isn't there a template they could be following?
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to jump in. Yeah, you've got SOX compliance, you've got HIPAA compliance. There's all sorts of compliance frameworks that have been out, deployed over the last couple decades that could be reintroduced into this particular area. Eric talks a lot about the sort of the carrots out there. A lot of the bits are already out there for folks to take and make and employ to improve their preparedness. What we need now are some sticks. Fortunately for this particular industry, much of the funding comes from federal, state, and local resources. And so that funding today, from a cybersecurity perspective, comes with no strings attached, no requirements, no whatnot. And so this attestation model that, again, we've seen in other industries, we think is a really ripe opportunity to bring that here and associate it, as you asked about the levels, all levels where the funding comes from. All the funding should require this attestation.
So I don't know if you all know this. Some of our viewers may know this, but there's an election in November. It's going to be kind of substantial at all levels of government. So if you were talking to either a returning cabinet or a new cabinet, let's say it's at the federal level or at state or local level, what do you want them to do immediately? Like, we know policy takes time, we know implementation takes time, but what can they be doing sooner rather than later so that Russian hackers don't figure out a way to send our public buses going all different directions, literally?
That's a good question. I wish our co-author is Scott Belcher on this, and he's our DC guy. I know you run around those circles, Eric. Maybe you can jump in here, but he's the guy that should answer that.
Yeah, frankly, what I will say is this. I don't see anything that a new or continuing administration could do immediately that would dramatically change the way things function among private transit agencies with respect to cybersecurity. I think that most of the proposals that we make, the recommendations that we make, are going to be a little bit slower burn. But frankly, as I say, they have already done a lot. I don't wish to give the federal government or state and local authorities a free pass. But if I think about the three things that are needed: information, resources, and accountability to get these private transit agencies where they need to be with respect to cybersecurity. The information, it's out there. It's not everything that's needed, but there's a lot of it. It's just not being leveraged. Resources, these agencies do need resources, because even if they have the motivation to get better at cybersecurity, oftentimes they don't have the money, they don't have the people, or the access to the talent that they would need to actually up their game. They could, contract out some of their cybersecurity functionality. That too requires money. So resources is probably the quickest fix that government could make. But again, I'll keep circling back to accountability, because even if you have information and resources out there, if you don't have accountability, a lot of these transit agencies are not going to get themselves where they need to go.
Yeah, one bit for the executives that may be listening to this among public transit agencies, one anecdotal thing we noticed was those agencies that brought folks in from outside seem to have the more robust program. They seem to have the capability and the wherewithal to get the program in place and to develop it. So versus those agencies that tried to develop from within. So I think the more we can introduce more cybersecurity expertise from other industries into this industry, that sort of cross-pollination, that will certainly be to the advantage of the individual agencies and the industry as a whole.
Yeah, well, it makes me bring up the topic we were talking about a second ago, which is the idea of the military and the strides they've made. And we know here in Texas that down in San Antonio, the United States Air Force is leading an effort in cybersecurity. In fact, it's the home of it for their efforts. But then we also know from innovation hubs all across the U.S. that there's a lot of startups that are getting involved in cybersecurity. So what is your advice to either those who come from a defense background or come from a startup background of how they can get involved and help?
So that it's It's a challenge because, like taking the cybersecurity angle first, it's a crowded field. There are literally thousands of cybersecurity companies out there, with varying focuses, varying sizes, various market emphases. But it is hard to distinguish yourself in the cybersecurity industry. I think that if a particular cybersecurity entity takes a close focus on a particular area of need, that's a good way to distinguish yourself and potentially really make a difference. There isn't a sector of the economy out there that has everything it needs with respect to cybersecurity. There's some that do a lot more already than others, like the banking sector, financial sector. But it could be that for some outfits, if they focus in on either systems that are specific to the transit sector or systems that are common to transit sector and some other areas of the economy, that they might be able to be heard in this space. But it is, I won't suggest that there is some simple formula, because it is a real challenge to distinguish yourself in cybersecurity these days. You have a handful of very big players, and thousands of very small players.
I will say, though, there are a couple things happening inside the space that are important to point out. One is assessments, like organizations going through assessments. And this is not, again, a technical assessment. This is much more sort of broader on the people, process, and technology. There's a gentleman, Mike Echols of Max Cybersecurity. He's leading one of APTA's committees on cybersecurity in public transit, and is doing great work around the idea of the maturity model, of not just kind of pointing out all the failures of your particular problem, but giving you a sort of an arc of maturity to follow so that you can grow your cybersecurity preparedness. I think there's a lot of things like that. I also mentioned, I don't know if there's an executive briefing by APTA as well that does a good job of kind of educating the leadership of public transit agencies. I think, opening your eyes, opening your aperture of kind of the information that's available out there right now, I think is really important. And then again, getting more of a quantitative and qualitative assessment of where you are today so that you can figure out how to develop your preparedness over time.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap this up, there's a lot of very crunchy information that was included. So who would you say are the couple of people, and I think I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, who are the people that you would say that if you're interested in this space, whether from the mobility side, the smart city side, or even the cybersecurity side specifically, who are the industry thought leaders, the influencers that Nora, our producer, can tag in the line so that people can learn more about their information, follow them on LinkedIn or whatever it might be?
You first got to look at the Mineta Transportation Institute. I mean, they underwrote this. They're standing up a lot more in the cybersecurity and transit realm over the coming months and years. Karen Philbrick and Hillary Nixon are doing great work there. Over at APTA, you've got Polly Hansen. I mentioned Mike Echols on the committee side. Those folks are putting a lot of information out there at that sort of micro and industry level. And then keep an eye, Eric, I don't know if you want to go into some of the CISA and TSA stuff out there as well.
Well, I don't think there's anything in particular that's worth highlighting. I mean, as I mentioned, they've got a number of initiatives underway. CISA has an outreach program to transportation agencies that I know it's been underway for a little bit more than a year. And it's something that from what I understand about it, is hitting all the right notes. It's just having a little bit of difficulty getting some traction. So what I would encourage for any transit agencies out there that are serious about trying to improve their cybersecurity, go reach out to CISA, find out what resources they have available, because they need more uptake on the stuff that they've been doing right now.
Well, perfect. Well, I think we timed this perfectly. My puppy slept the whole time and didn't make any noise, although I just heard the door open, so she might freak out in just a minute. So I'm going to use hush tones. But I want to thank both of you for joining us here on this Catalyst Talk. What's important for everyone to understand is that mobility is just one area where technology and all of the disruptions that are occurring through automation and bad actors, in this particular case, adversaries, are looking for ways to not only disrupt purposefully, but this is an opportunity for us to disrupt this industry. Oh, I just heard Flossie. She's growling. Anyway, so I want to thank you both for being a part of this. Stay connected. Nora's dropped several folks and their names in their research institute for the Mineta Transportation Institute. And in your own professional lives, Eric and Brandon, I know that you all can be contacted through the report itself and through the Grayline website as well. So I want to thank you both for being here. Have a good afternoon. Have a safe weekend. And like I try to tell a lot of people, stay safe, stay home, and stay connected. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.